On the line, we have with us author Fenton Bresler, who has written the book, Who Killed John Lennon? And just a moment, and we'll see. Fenton, are you there? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can just about hear you, but I am here, yes.
Okay, is that better?
It is better, yes.
Okay, we'll get things tuned up here. Perhaps you would like to introduce yourself to our audience.
Okay, well, you described me as an author. Well, that's true, but only partly true.
Okay.
In fact, I'm a barrister. It's an English trial attorney, you call it in this country. Anyone who saw a fish called Wanda or the Rumpole or the Bailey will remember the people who appear in court wearing wigs and gowns and argue in court. And that's what I am. And for the last 38 years, I've practiced at the bar in England, and indeed I still practice. But as well as practicing at the bar for many, many years, I've also written books and I've contributed to newspapers and to magazines. And so I have a sort of a double life, as it were. I'm both a barrister back in England and also a writer. And this book now, published by St. Martin's Press, Who Killed John Lennon, is in fact my 15th book. Only my third book to be published in America, but that's the background to me.
Well, in this book, what you're stating, in a sense, is something that a lot of our listeners are familiar with, but you go into great detail, much more detail than anybody's ever seen in print on this subject, and that is that Mark David Chapman may have been not the crazed loner, deranged Beatle fan, but who murdered John Lennon, but possibly a programmed assassin.
Well, that's exactly right, because for a start, he was neither crazed nor a Beatle fan. And the man is now in jail in Attica, in upstate New York, which is a prison for sane people. He was convicted on his own admission of guilt as a sane person. He is treated by the American penal and judicial system as a sane person. So he's not crazed. And secondly, he wasn't even a particular Beatle fan. In fact, in Honolulu, where he came from to commit the murder, or I think it was an assassination, his wife, for a while, had an attorney after the killing in order to protect herself from the general public and the media. And her local attorney was, like me, a middle-aged lawyer. And this chap, Brooke Hart, said to me, he said, Fenton, he said, you know that he, the middle-aged attorney, had more Beatles records in his collection than the so-called Beatles fan, Mr. Chapman.
Oh, boy. Now, yeah, I noticed that the person who Mark David Chapman admired was the direct opposite of Lennon.
Exactly, Ted Rundgren. Well, look, I mean, you know more about these things than I do, Will, because I have to confess my interest. I am not, myself, a Beatle fan.
Right.
And John Lennon, to me, to be absolutely honest, meant very little. He was a pop singer whom my children liked, but for me, music ended with the death of Beethoven. But as I understand it, Ted Rundgren was someone who was a completely opposite kind of musician from John Lennon. Lennon was someone who said that music and politics should meld into a positive force. And Rundgren was totally the opposite. Rundgren said that the musicians get on with their business, the politicians get on with their business, and they're totally different. Well, now, it was Rundgren who was the real idol of Mark David Chapman, not John Lennon.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's see if we can follow that trail. I'm going to let you sort of lay down the trail that you've come across briefly on this, and then we have some questions we could go over. In other words, when this began, in the book, where it begins right out there in front of the Dakota Hotel.
That's right. That's when, in fact, Lennon was gunned down on the 8th of December 1980. And I want to make the point at once that this was the first time in history that an entertainer was assassinated. It wasn't a murder, it was an assassination. It was the first time in history that an entertainer had actually been gunned down in the street as if he was a president or a king or a prime minister or something like that. And that's how I first got involved in it, because when Lennon was shot, I thought to myself, any sensible person would, my God, how awful. But it meant no more to me than that. I thought, my God, why kill John Lennon, for heaven's sake?
Right.
And in fact, within a couple of months, I was in New York, because I was then the legal correspondent of the Daily Mail, and I went over to meet with the attorneys in the case in order to come back in the summer of 1981 to cover the trial on the basis of English barrister looks at American justice and operation, But in fact, I made some very good contacts in early 1981 with the attorneys, and actually saw Chapman in court wearing his bulletproof waistcoat. I never went back to cover the trial, and there was no trial. And there was no trial, as you know very well.
Right, they just whisked him right off, took an alleged confession, and cashed him right in.
That's right, but there was no trial because, in fact, God came to Mark David Chapman in his prison cell on the 8th of June 1981 and told him to plead guilty. Well, I don't like sort of cases in which God comes to people in their cell and tells them to plead not guilty. And rather than tells them to plead guilty, it strikes me as being a little odd. And the immediate thought is that it was not a little different, not a little to be compared with the case of Lee Harvey Oswald, the alleged murderer of President Kennedy. There was no trial there. It was not God, but in that case, Ruby came to Lee Harvey Oswald at the Dallas Police headquarters and shot him dead, and therefore there was no trial.
Right, and Ruby had a very interesting death in his own right afterwards.
Exactly.
Marilyn, my co-host here, has a question I believe she wants to ask.
Sure.
Hi, Fenton.
Hi.
One of the things that was interesting to me was that in Attica there was constant that he could call. Chapman could use the telephone, and people could call him. And what do you think about that? Maybe that was the voice of God, the telephone. You know.
Well, it wasn't only in Attica. Attica was when he went only after he was convicted. Even more interesting and more important is when he was held in jail at Rikers Island, which is a holding prison for New York. I mean, forgive me, I'm an English lawyer, and I don't want to be rude or nasty about the country in which at the moment I am, but I find it quite inconceivable how people arrested and charged with murder can make telephone calls from prison. What happens in your great country is that people phone in, and if you want to make a call and you are a prisoner awaiting trial, you can in fact call them provided it's correct. Well, I don't get this. I mean, if a man is actually, the evidence is such that he can be arrested and put on trial for a crime, how he can be allowed to make telephone calls beats me. But at the same time as defense counsel was saying in court that this man has got no people get in touch with him, he's alone in jail, I know that at least 3 priests were in communication with him by telephone. Lord alone knows how many people were talking to him. I don't comprehend how this can happen. But it does.
The reason I asked this because I was very fascinated by the role, by the different people that you called controllers of Chapman. The first was a man named Scott.
Well, wait. I'm not, no, wait. You are reading into the book more than I put in the book. I'm not saying these people were controllers.
But
I don't name anybody as a controller. All I do is say that the man may have been controlled, and I do talk about people who were in communication with him. If you want to make a jump, that is down to you. I do not do it.
Okay, well, we're not making any jump. We're trying to... Okay, let's just say that... let's talk about, I believe it's Gene Scott?
Yes, Gene Scott.
Well, that's not his real name.
No.
I was just saying that he had a lot of people that did influence his life.
Oh, sure, but look, I want to explain this to you. I came to May Brussels, of whom I became very fond, indirectly through Yoko Ono, because in 1984 I was giving evidence at the President's Commission on Organized Crime in New York. I'd written to Yoko before, had no reply. But once I was in New York anyway, as in fact a consultant of the U.S. Justice Department, I thought, well, enough of this. I want to make contact with the woman. So when I was staying at a hotel in Midtown Manhattan, I wrote her a letter on the notepaper of the hotel, got a taxi, drove in the taxi up to the Dakota, handed in the letter to the porter, and by the time I got back to my hotel, there was a phone message from Yoko saying, received your message, call me, and I phoned her. And I had I spoke with her several times over the telephone, and she hummed and hawed whether she was going to see me or not see me. In the end, she said, no, she didn't want to see me, but she was more concerned with the living John than the dead John, but she did want me to talk to a man called John Wiener. Now, John, as Mark became something of a friend, was a man whom she said wrote the best biography, the best book of her husband. It was a book called Come Together.
Right, the John Lennon in his time.
That's right. And it was through a working breakfast, which I personally know, there you are, you're American, always going to these things, for a working breakfast at the hotel in New York with John. He then put me on to May Bartle. You know, better than I did. Died sadly last year of cancer. Mm-hmm. Now, it was May who propounded to me the conspiracy theory. I am the last person in the world to embrace a conspiracy theory. I'm a cynical English lawyer. I don't look for conspiracists or conspiracy people under bushes. But I have to say that what May had to tell me does make a great deal of sense.
So it was the basis of your book, from what I can see.
Yeah, well, the basis of my book is looking at it as a lawyer.
Right.
I'm going to it as a lawyer. Now, I don't like the fact that there was no trial. I don't like the fact that basically there was no police investigation, because I found in retirement the lieutenant of detectives in the precinct where the murder was committed who said, "Counsel, there was no trial. There was no trial, there was no investigation. There was no investigation because, quite honestly, the police had many other things to do. There was a smoking gun. There was a man who shot Lennon dead. He then stood and didn't try and even escape. It was a grounder. And to try and find an explanation for a case in which there is no trial, in which there's no investigation, you go, by way of Yoko Ono and John Wiener, to May. And May came up with the theory, as you know, is better than I do, that in fact Lennon, by December 1980, was coming out of his 5 years period as a house husband. He just cut his first record for 5 years, Double Fantasy. He'd had his 40th birthday, which I dimly recall as an event of some importance in a man's life, and he was becoming himself again. He was going back to be politically active. And in fact, John Wiener told me, and I checked it out, that the very week that he was shot, on the Monday, on the Saturday, he was going to take part for the first time in 5 years in a street demonstration in the streets of San Francisco in support of striking Japanese-American workers. So you have a situation where by late 1980, Lennon is becoming himself the man who said, "Give peace a chance." Right. And the month before, Reagan had been elected president. Now, I'm not saying for 1 second that Reagan was behind any kind of conspiracy. I don't believe in that sort of garbage.
Oh, I didn't suggest that either.
That's right. Well, some people have said that I said that. I didn't say. I'm not saying that.
Uh-huh. But anyway, what you see, though, is a definite concerted, that the evidence operating on the level that was claimed in the hearing and in the press, is what you're saying. You saw a completely different person, and that's what I'm getting out of the book.
Oh, sure. That's exactly right.
Right.
And the only way to try and explain the inconsistencies in the evidence is to go along with something that May Brussell indicated, which was, in fact, that Reagan had just become elected president. He hadn't even taken office yet. And as May said to me, if there was one person who could bring 1 million people out in protest of the policies of the Reagan administration, it was an activated, newly inspired John Lennon. So they got rid of him before Reagan even took the oath of office.
Right. He was coming out a brand new, all cleaned up, and active John Lennon.
That's right.
And let's see, looking at Mark David Chapman now, just following his traveling, he did a lot of traveling before this happened, if I'm not mistaken, including, let's see, he was, this is not casting any aspersions on the YMCA, which is an excellent organization by its own right, but wasn't it through the YMCA that he did a lot of traveling? He went
again, that is right. And again,
right.
Obviously one cannot spark.
I'm trying to get, I understand what you're saying, but I'm not asking you to defend things in your book. I'm trying to get an idea more, get you to explain more of your book to the listeners out there.
Well, what I say is this, and it's on record that the YMCA had in the 60s been infiltrated by the CIA. And quite honestly, in the defense of what the CIA considered the security of our country, I can understand that. I mean, it's a marvelous organization. There's 91 offices outside of the USA and outside of the Iron Curtain throughout the world. What better cover can you want? I'd be surprised if our English MI5 hadn't done the same sort of thing. And that's perhaps why, in 1975, there's this young boy who's actually a YMCA devotee and very much involved in YMCA activity. At the age of 20, there he is in the Middle East. And he's not, as you might expect a young Christian fundamentalist from the South to be, in Jerusalem, walking in the path of Christ on the Via Dolorosa. No, he's in Beirut, just as it happens when the Civil War is starting, which is still sadly going on.
Okay.
And he was so blooded, he was so affected by the violence, he came back and actually played recordings of the violence to friends of his in Atlanta, to whom I have myself spoken.
Fenton, you know, I was in Quito in 1974, and people talked openly about the CIA and their presence there. So I was very interested in what you had to say about Quito.
Well, yeah, well, I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, it was about, and I was, yeah.
Sure. And indeed, the other thing which is so interesting is that now, for some reason, he was in fact employed by the YMCA for some time, and any reference to Chapman is missing from the central records of the YMCA. Now, that is not in itself conclusive because they're not terribly well kept records, but it's interesting that he is not there. But I did get from the New York office his actual application form in 1975 for Chapman going out to the Middle East. Now, what is interesting is the very first place is young fundamentalist Christian applied to go to was, of all things, Moscow. And it wasn't in the days of Gorbachev, it was in the days of Brezhnev. Now again, it is on record that the CIA did use businessmen and students behind the Iron Curtain as informants, and not spies in the sense of going to look at their plans for music, for what would you call it, for military installations. But I mean, you know, as in fact informants. Now, there's this fundamentalist Christian wanting to go to Moscow. And the reason he was rejected was because he couldn't speak Russian. Then he opts to go to Beirut, where the civil war is just about to start. God.
Very odd. Especially the fact that, you know, right in the middle of that, knowing what was happening, what was brewing. Why? Why would he choose that? Then he ends up coming back to Hawaii and he gets married. And this is what they try. I think they tried to say that he was imitating Lennon by marrying a Japanese wife.
That's absolute nonsense.
That's what I thought too. That's exactly what I thought too. But that isn't it. It's interesting where they tried to put that twist on. Why they really tried to hammer in on that crazed fan theory.
Yeah, well, yeah. You know, look, I mean, you know as well as I do, Will, that in fact one of the things that got into the press at the time was that there were 14 hours of Beatles tapes on him when he was arrested. And then while he was standing around waiting to shoot Paul Lennon, there he was listening to the music of the Beatles and above all to Lennon. That is garbage. I mean, I have in fact got a photocopy of the record taken by the arresting police officer of what he had on him when in fact he was arrested. There were no 14 hours of tapes, weren't even 14 minutes. There were no tapes on him when he was arrested at all. It's nonsense. What there was in his hotel room, there was in fact, you know, a cassette of Mr. Todd Rundgren. But there were no Beatles tapes on him when he was arrested.
Yeah, Todd Rundgren, that's a Philadelphia boy. That's not, that's so far removed from John Lennon. So anyway, now The Catcher in the Rye was another interesting aspect in this whole mess. That do you think that was used as a, shall we say, let's just hypothetically say he was programmed to kill John Lennon, which is what, in essence, it looks like.
What I think may have happened, as I said at the end of the book, that, as we say in court in England, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the verdict is yours. I just present evidence and leave it to my readers, or indeed even my listeners to judge. I don't push my conclusions down their throats or into their eyes. I think the significance of the chapter, The Catcher in the Rye, is this. I think that the evidence would indicate that Chapman was in fact programmed way back in the mid-70s when he was with the YMCA, and I think that there is such a thing as mind control, brain control, there is such a thing as programmed assassins, and chapters on the book deal with that. And I think that he was kept on hold as a sort of very fundamentalist Christian who would be the ideal assassin for someone who could be portrayed as an antichrist. Now, no one could be better portrayed as an antichrist than John Lennon, because although he didn't quite put it in those terms, everybody believed, and to some extent it's true, he said that the Beatles are more popular than Christ. I mean, however you actually look at it, that's in fact what he did say in 1964-65. Now, I think he was kept on hold. Now, I think he was activated by Catcher in the Rye. Now, everybody would seem to think that Chapman, who called himself the Catcher in the Rye of this generation, had always thought that he was Holden Caulfield, who was the 16-year-old hero of that novel, whose role in life it was to blow away phonies. He didn't. He read, like many other American kids in school, Catcher in the Rye, the J.D. Salinger masterpiece, and then he forgot about it. It was only in August 1980, when Reagan was already ahead of Carter in the Gallup polls, that for some reason we don't know, when he was living in Hawaii, someone got him interested again in Catcher in the Rye, and he began reading the book Catcher. It was only then that he began to identify himself as Holden Caulfield, the man who shot away phonies, and he believed that maybe, he said again, look, well, there are two absolute inconsistencies. One theory is that he thought he was John Lennon, he married the Japanese girl like Lennon did, that he in fact thought that only by way of killing John Lennon could he become and free himself, be the true John Lennon. That's one theory, right? The other theory, put forward by the defense incidentally, was that he was the Catcher in the Rye, he was Holden Caulfield, who had to rid the world of phonies. Well, you can't be John Lennon and the guy whose mission in life is to kill John Lennon because he's a phony. It doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't. Are you familiar with the, I'm sure you are, studying law and being in law and studying various cases around the world. I'm sure you're familiar with the Robert F. Kennedy case, and Sirhan's predicament, which, according to May's research, and I I feel right along with May that my own personal opinion now is that in all likelihood Sirhan was programmed to act in the way he did, and possibly he wasn't the lone gunman there either, but he was the focus. He was the guy who was going to take the fall.
Well, you know, in fact, at the end of the end of my second chapter on mind control,
right.
I quote quite extensively from the evidence with regard to Sirhan.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, you know, there's a part there where a doctor is trying to understand more about Sirhan, and because he kept on repeating things, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so this doctor, Dr. Diamond, was examining him on the entries in his own diary, and he kept on saying, "Why all this crazy writing?" And so Sirhan wrote, "Yes, yes, yes." And he said, "Are you crazy?" And Sirhan said, "No, no, no." "Well, why are you writing crazy?" "Practice, practice, practice." "Practice for what?" "Mind control, mind control, mind control," wrote Sirhan.
Right. And, you know, this Dr. Diamond
That's right.
pops up in the, I believe it's the same Dr. Diamond. Dr. Bernard Diamond pops up in the Mark David Chapman case.
I know.
Don't you find that kind of strange? If he's the
Well, I
same
find it
people?
very interesting, put it this way, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I just believe in understatement, not overstatement, yeah.
Right, I guess that's one way to look at it. There's a researcher up north here by the name of David Emery who has his own program, and he likes to say food for thought, grounds for further research. I guess that would be a good category to put it in.
I think so.
Okay, now going on, the book, you really go into a lot of detail into John Lennon, though, and into, I noticed, and into the political undercurrent that surrounded John Lennon to, back in the 70s and then on up to the 80s. And also, you even bring in the Christic Institute at one point here. Well, not into the story, but just sort of, touch on some of the stuff that Daniel...
Well, yes, I mean, I don't know why I say even. I mean, yes, that's right, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Again, that was a connection for May. It was through May Brussell that I went to Washington and interviewed Danny Sheehan. You know, they were one of the powers behind the Christic Institute.
Right, he's the chief counsel.
Yeah.
And main spokesman for the Christic. Go ahead, Marilyn, you had something.
I have to compliment you, Fenton, because I think you really got to the relationship between Yoko Ono and John Lennon.
Really?
Yes, I think so. It was one of the most sensitive portrayals I've read.
Oh, very kind. Oh, thank you.
And I've read a lot of them, and I was really surprised. I mean, it really touched me.
Well, that's kind of you, especially quite honestly. I mean, this isn't my sort of music, so once you say that, I'm even more complimented.
Thank you.
Well, maybe it helps to be nearly 40 years in the law. You see a lot of people and know a lot about human feelings, even one's own.
I think that people take an oversimplified view of people in the public eye. They are people.
Of course they are.
But, the legends and the things that are written about them become truth. And that's why I was very impressed with your book, because it's very sticks to the facts and it is very truthful. I'm hoping a lot of people will get a chance to read it.
Well, that's kind of you. Thank you so much. I mean,
Right, and I hope you don't think I was trying to take you somewhere where you didn't go in the book. I was just trying to go over some of the... I'm trying to relate to people out there who haven't read the book, who don't even know the book's out there, because I know that I believe, or at least I feel, you might have had problems getting it printed in here originally, didn't you, in the United States? Did you have any problems getting it published here first? Or?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say I did, because I think that's fair. I mean, I really don't... I had a great deal of problems, I suppose, really, because here am I, an English lawyer coming in, and I've done a lot of this sort of radio work and television work and whatever, and a number of people have taken the view, what is this limey lawyer doing, talking about us, and what about the IRA in England and Ireland and whatever, and attacking me. And all I'm doing is looking at it simply as a lawyer. As a lawyer, it doesn't make sense. I don't like the way in which there was no trial. The prosecution didn't, with respect to their job properly. The man was sentenced to Hagamagan about half an hour, or to no more than an hour, to 20 years to life. There was no investigation. And then, in fact, I go away and find that there are 3 missing days in Chicago. Now, well, you know this about the 3 missing days in Chicago.
Mm-hmm. But why don't you, for those out there who haven't read your book yet, and why don't we go over that?
Well, I'll tell you, the classic theory is, and indeed, is basically only media theory, because since there was no trial, there was no evidence of the trial to report. The classic theory is, and any book you read about Lennon will have you this, that in fact, Lennon was shot dead, as everybody knows, on the evening of Monday, December 8, 1980. Now, Chapman, who was then living in Honolulu, is supposed to have flown out of Honolulu on Friday, December 5, overnight, switches planes in Chicago, arrives in New York on the morning of December 6th, stalks Lennon over the weekend and shoots him dead on the Monday evening. That's the theory, right?
Right.
He didn't do that because, in fact, he left behind him a ticket, I think it was a doctor ticket in a hotel room in New York. And what happened was that ticket has number X12345. I can't remember now what it was, 12345 whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And that ticket says that he left on Friday, December 5. It isn't even a ticket to New York. It's a return ticket, Chicago, Honolulu. Not even a ticket to New York, anyway. So I'm in Honolulu. I was 3 times went to Honolulu to check this thing out, and I thought, well, there must be some kind of investigation. Even though there was no investigation properly, there must be some kind of follow-up. And in fact, there was. The Honolulu police did, in fact, have a team going into the background to the murder, and that team consisted not of 3 or 4 or 5 men, but of 1 man, a detective in homicide, who has now become a captain of the criminal investigation department. So I went and interviewed this 1-man team. And a very nice man, and he was prepared to talk to me. And I cannot say I saw his file because he wouldn't show me his file. But he said, you ask me questions, counsel, he called me counselor. You ask me questions, and I'll give you the answers from my file. So we're just sitting there, and when you're doing this sort of work, you just ask questions, sometimes without even knowing what answer you're going to get. You go through the routine. So I said, well, when did he, how did he get from Honolulu to New York? So he said, oh, well, there was this ticket, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the same ticket numbers in the New York hotel room. And it was December 2. I said, hang on, wait, what do you mean December 5? He said, no, it's December 2. I said, hang on, please. We had this sort of almost Abbott and Costello discussion. Mm-hmm. And in fact, it was December 2. Right. And in fact, he confirmed that the man flew out of Honolulu on the Tuesday. And there were 3 other independent sources who confirmed to me that Chapman flew out on the Tuesday, not to shoot Lennon bang bang, admittedly he did have the gun with him, but in fact he was taking his granny home to Chicago. And you don't normally go and kill a man with granny in your suitcase.
No, you don't.
There are 3 missing days in Chicago. Now, I came back to New York, and the district attorney had been very helpful in New York, and I phoned him up and said, no, look, he was with this gun. That's a lie. All right, it's a lie. So he had told the judge that the prosecution had got out a 16-page chronology of Chapman's movements before the crime. So I said to the special assistant to the district attorney of New York, look, please let me have a copy of this 16-page chronology, and I won't write garbage. That'll tell me what happened. You with me? Mm-hmm. And the answer was, we're very sorry, the chronology is missing.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Doctoring.
And I didn't invent it. I've got a copy of the letter. I've got the original letter. So, I don't know. Well, I'm just a tired, cynical old English lawyer, but I don't like it. And what I would dearly like to happen, and I have very, very heavy feelings that it won't happen, is that there should be a proper investigation even now.
Right. It's like it's like, just for example, say you're a member of a firm or something, and or some sort of organization, and there's financial improprieties alleged, and then all of a sudden there's like a shutdown, there's nothing happening there for about a month, and then you finally get in and they have an official meeting, and all of a sudden they have a crystal clear everything written up there, but it's like, where's the real paper?
Exactly.
Yes.
Well, like I remember seeing years ago, because I love your country very much, I come here very often, there was a series of commercials I went to with this nice little old lady saying, where's the beef?
Right.
It's been lost.
Oh, yeah.
And where's the beef on the murder? Where's the beef on the investigation?
You're right. They didn't take it anywhere. They didn't take it anywhere.
And it's very sad.
You know something? I live here, and I was born and raised here in the United States. In fact, I come from the East Coast myself, and, it's unfortunate because you mentioned earlier that you share sort of a cynical attitude as to you can't figure out why we don't investigate things or go into things a little deeper or handle things the way we do. And I live here, and you know something? I could sit there and say the same thing to you, and I was born and raised here. I ask myself the same questions,
That makes me feel better. I mean, it means it's not just me.
No, it's not just you. There's a lot of people out there that are asking questions. I just hope more and more of them start asking, and they start forcing. This is still allegedly supposed to be a democracy. Now, if that's so, and if enough people want to take the responsibility, they can change things. It can be changed. illegally and through the.
Well, I have. I mean, look, I made application under the Freedom of Information Act, which I must say you can't do any. I made application under the Freedom of Information Act, which I must say you can't do in England. This is one plus for America.
Oh, really?
I've got,
Yeah.
200 odd pages out. I mean, it doesn't. Most of the evidence is all blacked out on the FBI files. But there's one thing which is terribly significant. On one of the pages, when almost everything is blacked out, all to do with the surveillance of Lennon. Someone has written, an FBI man has written across the page, referring to John Lennon, let me tell you, all extremists should be considered dangerous.
That sounds like pure Hoover.
Yeah, I know, but pure Hoover in the early 70s, but I mean, that sort of thing can go on,
Right. In fact, it has. There was recently, not to get off the subject, but if you remember, there was the investigation into the allegations of the organization CISPIS, who was helping the Salvadorian refugees in this country, that the FBI was breaking into their offices and into their in the churches and stuff and rifling their files and gathering names. And it came out in testimony of Frank Valeri, I think his name was, who was one of these people who was working for the FBI. It got to the point that his conscience couldn't take it anymore, so he turned himself in, and he claims that they were taking the names. There were factions within the FBI. I'm not saying the whole FBI per se, but factions within the FBI were taking the names and sending them right back to the El Salvador government, which means they were sending them to the death squads. So...
Yeah. So let me tell you again, with this very nice man I found in retirement, Mr. O'Connor, who was the lieutenant of detectives, he said to me, and I'm quoting from my own book, he said, I'm the only guy he ever gave an interview to because no one else seemed to have found him. He said to me, I'm reading now, it's possible Mark could have been used by somebody. I saw him the night of the murder. I studied him intensely. He looked as if he could have been programmed, and I know what use you're going to make of that word. That was the way he looked, and that was the way he talked. It could have been drugs. I know we did not test for drugs. It wasn't standard procedure. But looking back, he could have been either drugged or programmed or a combination of both. And that is the Lieutenant of Detectives of the 20th Precinct of New York City.
Well, with that, I would like to, it's getting near the top of the hour. I'm going to thank you very much for granting me this interview, and I'm going to recommend that people get a hold of this book.
That's very kind of you. Thank you so much, and I'm very, very happy indeed.
It's coming out in paper, right? Paperback now?
Eventually, yes. Next year, yes.
Oh, next year. Okay, and it's out on the market. If you, let's see, is it at most of the leading bookstores? I've got my copy through Tom Davis. You know Tom?
I know Tom. I had dinner with him and with May.
Oh, great. Well, anyway, I got my copy. I get all my books for Tom Davis if I can.
Yeah, but I think it's in, I know it's in Walden Books. At least I've seen it there, and I think B. Dalton as well. It's Who Killed John Lennon. It's published by St. Martin's Press. It will be out next year in paperback, but at least people buy it in hardcover now,
Right, and I would tell you it's well worth reading. It really
Thank you very much. I'm very, very happy indeed also, Will, to take part in a program that used to be involved with May Brussell.
Thank you very much, and I enjoyed reading the book very much. And like I said, I was impressed that you saw and understood how people felt about John Lennon.
That's very kind of you. Thank you so much indeed, Marilyn.
Thank you.
Thank
So
you.
with that,
How about the two of you?
okay,
Bye.
we'll see you later then, Fenton.
Thanks a lot.
All right,
Bye-bye. Bye.